Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with temperature sensor inputs and programming for our Link G5 and G4X systems. In this tutorial, we're going to be specifically taking a look at setting up engine coolant temperature and intake air temperature. These are the two basic temperature sensor inputs we'll have for any installation on any engine. We may also find you're wiring in engine oil temperature, or even something like transmission or differential temperature. You can use other temperature sensor configuration and input setup with the Link. What we'll learn from setting up our engine coolant temp or intake air temp will apply to setting up any type of temperature sensor input in the programming. Very straightforward, so we're going to dig in here and learn how to do this. So first things first, because my G5 is a fresh installation here on my Honda K-Series engine, I have not assigned any temperature sensor inputs to the Link. This is the default file, the G5 file that they provide. As a result, we're going to see that the engine coolant temperature and inlet air temperature are both reading 32 degrees. This is a default value in its reading. We need to go in and tell the Link where we've wired in terms of the input for the sensor, and then what type of sensor we're working with, and essentially giving it the calibration scale. It's very easy to do this, but there are some specific things we need to note and pay attention to. Let's jump in and take a look at where we can program both of these temperature sensor inputs. We're going to move from our basics page right here, and we're going to go across to our analog input page. Here we can find engine coolant temperature, ECT, and intake air temperature, IAT. This is where we do the actual programming in these windows. We also find engine oil temperature as the other common temperature input easily programmed within this window. If we have something in terms of a temperature sensor input that's not found within the predefined ECT, IAT, or engine oil temperature, so for example, transmission temperature, we can use a general purpose input, which we can find right here, GP temperature 1. We can set up a custom name and then tell it where we've wired it to, and then set up a calibration scale so it understands where to find the sensor and how to translate a voltage or resistance value into an actual accurate temperature sensor reading. Okay, let's first set up engine coolant temp and intake air temp here within our window. First things first, engine coolant temperature. I'm going to set this up because this is the very first one on the list. Now I know where I've wired my engine coolant temp and intake air temperature in terms of the inputs to my G5 box. I've actually wired engine coolant temperature into my analog temperature 2 input and my intake air temperature to the analog temperature 1 input. So I know where those pin designations are for both temp sensors. If you're unsure of which is wired, so where either is wired, setting up a fresh install, maybe you didn't get a pinout chart for whatever reason with the vehicle, with the harness, and you're trying to sort things out, you can use your runtime values list to actually find this and sort this out very quickly. If we go to tuning and go to runtime values, we can see here on the analog screen, we have our analog input states. Then we find we have analog temperature and analog temperature status. Here we can see what the actual raw voltage is reading on the Link for these particular channels. Now, I know analog temp 1 and analog temp 2 are what I have wired in for engine coolant temp and intake air temp. Analog temp 3 and 4, note that they're reading 4.95. This is open circuit, so they haven't been assigned and nothing has been wired into them, so they're going to read a high voltage value. This is going to tell you that these aren't being used, but we find that there's voltages a little bit lower than that here. It's going to tell me that both of these are in use. That confirms my wiring that I know. I've already written down the pinouts and I know which ones I'm using, but this confirms which is which. Now, if I didn't know which temperature sensor was which, I could unplug the temp sensor, and if you see it change to 4.95, then you would know that is going to be that particular temperature input associated to the sensor. So if you're trying to sort this out, then once it's assigned, you can see the status here showing that it is activated or not. Right now they're showing off because we haven't configured anything in our windows right here. So as we're noting, we have our analog inputs, map, and fuel pressure. Note that they're both showing here active status and that they're assigned to these particular channels. It'll show this once we're done setting up and calibrating our air temp and engine coolant temp. It'll show that status down here in this window. So the runtime value window can be a valuable window to take a look at if you're unsure of which sensor is wired to which input. You can figure that out pretty quickly, so I wanted to mention that. All right, let's close this up. Okay, Now let's jump in and take a look at how to set up engine coolant temperature. Again, looking at this, it's reading a default of 32 degrees Fahrenheit simply because we haven't defined the input and defined the calibration scale for the sensor we're working with. If we jump up here to source,
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.